I've been asked 100 times how you can best hang things from the ceiling of a room, including very heavy things. Today, I'm explaining the 5 best ways to tackle ceiling mounting, with each way addressing increasingly heavier loads. That's coming up next on the Honest Carpenter Show. When it comes to attaching things to the ceiling, I really don't like to take chances. The idea of something dropping onto someone's head is too scary. So I don't use any plastic sleeve anchors or the self-drilling plastic anchors that I like for walls. These anchors basically rely on grip pressure within the drywall itself, and drywall is a very soft, powdery material that's prone to crumbling. All of the weight when you're hanging from a ceiling is tensional force, which is the stress of 2 objects pulling away from each other, in this case caused by gravity. And that internal grip is never enough to rely on for really any weight over a pound when it's hanging like this. Plus, these types of anchors don't work at all in plaster walls, because plaster is very prone to fracturing and it's usually backed by irregular lath. So I won't use sleeve or expansion type anchors in a ceiling no matter what it's made of. Instead, if I'm mounting anything over a couple pounds, I may go with our first option. Use a toggle bolt. Toggle bolts are the anchors that have little spring out wings, and newer, really convenient ones come with snap-off plastic inserts to make installation easier. To install them, you drill or punch a hole through the ceiling where you want to suspend something. Then you collapse the wings or tilt the toggle and push it through the hole. The wings spring open on the other side, or the toggle will tilt, and you can tighten it in place by turning the supplied bolt through it. The reason I like them is that you get that suspending effect that comes from having wings open on the back side of the ceiling. It's much harder to pull them through the material that way. And the great thing is you can put them really wherever you want them because they create their own support. But you have to be sure not to overload them. I don't like to get anywhere near the weight limits suggested on the packages, which are often talking about wall mounting loads. Again, tensional stress on toggles in the ceiling is much greater, and you want to stay far away from the failure point. I personally wouldn't go beyond 10 pounds with them. If you want to create more reliable strength for hanging something heavier, you might want to go with option 2, hang from a joist. Joists in the ceiling are just like studs in the wall, except that they run horizontally and span open distances above and below us. They're also typically wider than studs, usually 6 to 12 inches. Joists are the actual framing of the house, and they're very strong. You can hang really heavy loads from a ceiling joist with the right hardware, over 100 pounds in many cases. You just need to locate the joist first. I tend to do this by knocking with my knuckles or using magnets to locate fastener heads. Or if I have one on hand, I will just use a stud finder. But when I find a joist, before I mount to it, I make sure to bracket the joist to find the center because that's where I hang from. I did a whole video on that, so check it out. It's really important. You don't want your fastener catching the edge of the joist. You want it in the center. But with something like a screw eye bolt or a screw hook, you can just pre-drill at your joist location using a drill bit slightly narrower than your screw. Then turn your threaded hardware into the hole, clear to the last thread, and hang things from it. I do lots and lots of ceiling mounting this way because it's very reliable. And the ceiling typically has joists spaced every 16 inches. So you can find one fairly close to your desired hanging location. But if a joist still isn't right where you want it and you need to hang something really heavy in a very particular spot, you can move on to option number 3, add blocking to the ceiling. Blocking is basically short framing pieces that bridge the space horizontally between longer framing members. Your house is actually full of blocking. You're just not likely to find it in the right place by luck. But if you're careful, you can add more wherever you want it. This is easiest to do if the ceiling actually has an open attic space above it. If that's the case, you can look down at the back of the drywall surface from above, even if you have to sweep blown insulation aside. My mock-up ceiling here is just 2x6s, but it simulates looking down into the joist base from above. So I can poke a hole right where I want to mount and find it from above. Then I can measure the space between joists and cut a block to that length. From here, you've got 2 options. The first is that you can just lay the block down flat inside and attach it over the hole by end screwing through adjacent framing to trap it in place. If end screwing is not an option for some reason, you can pre-drill holes at a steep angle on both ends of the block, push it down to the back of the drywall or plaster, and drive toenail screws through the block into the adjacent joists, maybe 2 or even 3 per side. By installing it flat like this, you give yourself a really wide field of lumber to hit from below. And because the span is so short, it can hold quite a bit of weight, like possibly your whole body weight. And to make it even stronger than that, you can also turn your blocking up on end and install it in a similar way. Standing it up like this gives it crazy maximum strength even if it presents a narrower edge to hit from below. Things are always stronger in their wider dimension. That's why joists are all standing up on edge rather than lying flat. I'm going to cover this topic more in the future because it's the underpinning of how we build like literally everything in the world. But that's for later videos. Now, if you can't get to the space from above, like through an attic, you can still manage to do the install. Just cut a decent sized hole in your ceiling and do the installation from below. I like to use an oscillating tool to make the cuts because it's really clean and fast. You just want to open up a space from the midpoint of one joist to the midpoint of another. That way, you'll be able to reattach your drywall patch in place. It's more cramped working like this, and yes, you do have to fix drywall afterwards. But this is how you can still add strong, custom blocking between occupied floors. An alternative version of this is option number 4. Add a surface cleat. In this case, you just cut a flat piece of wood, maybe a decorative hardwood, find 2 joists near your mounting location, and screw the cleat against the drywall into the joists. Now you can put a hanger somewhere in the span of the cleat, and you can even run your cleat diagonally as long as you're bridging 2 joists, so the cleat is supported at both ends. Just remember that this is not as strong as adding blocking. The weight value is probably somewhere between toggles and blocking based on the type of wood and fasteners that you use. And yes, you'll have this chunky block hanging down into the room. You can caulk or paint it in, but it might be an eyesore, especially if you use 2x4. A trick to hide it a little better though is to trace out its exact location with a pencil, then notch out the drywall for this shape and recess the wooden piece into the drywall layer. You can caulk around it, paint it, and get a slightly more flush appearance this way. That's an old mounting trick. And finally, option number 5 is sort of convoluted and I've only seen it used a couple times, but I'll add it here in case it helps somebody. You can also hang from a threaded rod. In this example, if you can get to the attic, you can add a 2x4 plate across the tops of the exposed joists. Then you can bore a hole through it and feed a 1/4 inch or 3/8 threaded rod down through the joist bay, through the drywall, and into the room. Now you can add washers and bolts at the top for holding power, and then hang stuff from washers and bolts at the bottom. I've seen contractors who had to hang heavy false beams do it this way by encasing a suspended 2x4 inside and attaching to it. Again, it's sort of convoluted, but the concept of suspending from threaded rod is something you see a lot in commercial construction with steel trusses, and it just may help you in a weird situation. At any rate, I hope that gives you a better idea of how to safely hang heavy stuff from the ceiling. Let me know what you think of these methods down below, and if you have other ways, let me hear that as well. I'll link tools and materials that might help down in the description, so feel free to shop those links if you're interested. As always, thanks for watching. Be sure to check back soon for more videos coming up, and please consider subscribing and hitting that bell button to turn on notifications. That way you'll know the moment we post something. I'm Ethan James with the Honest Carpenter. I'll see you next time.